A few weeks ago, I told you about how the people who know America's deepest secrets keep turning up dead or missing. The FBI is now reviewing it. The White House is calling it pretty serious stuff. 11 American scientists, contractors, and government officials silenced under circumstances nobody can quite explain. Well, today, that list is one name longer. I'm Carol Ann. Welcome to the In-Between. For those of you who joined us a couple of episodes back for our deep dive in the missing and dead American scientists, welcome back. If you missed it, we have a link for it in the description so that after you watch this one, you can go back and get all caught up on this crazy saga. But I promised you guys I would update you if there were any updates on the case. So here we are. I just didn't expect it to happen quite this fast. So let's dive right in. The newest name on that list is Joshua LeBlanc. He was 29 years old and worked for NASA. And his case is just as bizarre as the other ones. But it's more than that this time because Josh's death ties 3 of our previous victims together through a single institutional chain that makes it really hard to just blow it off as coincidence. So today, we're going to do what we did with the others. We're going to look at who he was, what he was working on, the day he died, and then where he fits in the whole grand scheme of things that makes him number 12. Josh LeBlanc grew up in New Iberia, Louisiana, Cajun country, about 140 miles west of New Orleans. He graduated from Catholic high school there in 2014 and went on to earn an electrical engineering degree from the University of Louisiana. Smart kid. A young man whose obituary describes him as kind and generous, with a streak of curiosity that found a very specific home. Right out of college, he went to work for NASA. He started in New Orleans, then relocated to Huntsville, Alabama, to join the Marshall Space Flight Center. Squirrel moment! As I go through and build these scripts, I usually start a project in Google Earth so I can get a good idea of where these places are that I'm talking about. So, of course, the first place I brought up in Google Earth was Huntsville. Now, before I show you what comes up when you search for Huntsville, let me give you a little context. I looked up Minneapolis. Pretty straightforward as far as boundaries go. It's basically just a big rectangle. And then I checked out New York, New Orleans, and Miami. They're all a little more janky looking because they're all on the coasts, so their boundaries include islands and waterways and stuff. But check out Huntsville. Is that not the most ADHD Etch-a-Sketch looking thing you've ever seen? What the hell is going on in Huntsville that they would need to gerrymander their borders this bad? Interesting. Anyway, back to Josh. In the 5 years he was at NASA, he moved up the kind of way that gets your name on a lot of internal lists. He started on the Space Nuclear Propulsion Instrumentation and Control Maturation team. Oofed up. And then became lead on that team. Then he was promoted to lead a nuclear propulsion program called Draco. So this kid is walking tall. He is 29 years old. He's got a Tesla Model 3. He's got a dog. Life is good. And he is a rising star. So, let's talk about Draco. Draco stands for Demonstration Rocket for Agile Cislunar Operations. Don't panic. I'll break that down in a minute. Draco was a joint NASA and DARPA program. DARPA, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. They're the people who develop the fun technologies that the U.S. military will be using 20 years from now. They are, by definition, a defense agency. So, when half of a program is owned by a defense agency, that program is really a defense program. NASA's just along for the ride. Now, what Draco was building is nuclear thermal propulsion. You take a nuclear reactor and use it to heat up hydrogen propellant to crazy hot. You shoot the hot hydrogen out the back of the rocket and you get thrust. A lot more of it than you would get with a regular chemical rocket, which means a trip to Mars gets a whole lot quicker. That's the NASA version of why this program exists, to get astronauts to Mars faster. But that's not why DARPA was on the program. DARPA was on the program because the same technology that gets you to Mars faster also moves military spacecraft around the moon's orbital region in a hurry. That region of space, the space between Earth and the moon, is called cislunar space. And the United States Space Force has gone on record stating cislunar maneuverability is a strategic priority. The word agile in Draco's name is not about Mars. It's about military utility in cislunar space. The contractors on Draco included Lockheed Martin, BWXT, which is the nuclear contractor, General Atomics, and Blue Origin, the Jeff Bezos space company. The program was on track for a 2027 demonstration launch and had progressed into Phase 2 development, which is basically building a test engine without the nuclear part. And then, on May 30th, 2025, Draco was canceled. The public explanation came from DARPA's deputy director, Rob McHenry. According to him, as SpaceX kind of showed the world how to do this whole space thing way cheaper than anyone thought possible, the return on investment for nuclear thermal propulsion just wasn't there anymore. Plus, it turns out that paperwork for launching and ground testing a nuclear reactor was a little harder than they thought it would be. Imagine that. So May 30th, 2025, the program is canceled. Termination procedures are completed, and the research data is transferred to NASA. 53 days later, the team lead for the project, Josh LeBlanc, is dead. It's the morning of July 22nd, 2025. Josh doesn't show up for work. His family starts making noise immediately, so investigators go to his apartment. His phone is there. His wallet is there. And his dog is there. Now, there are plenty of people who leave their dogs at home when they need to be gone for the day to go to work or whatever, but his phone and his wallet? So the investigators pull the data from the Sentry mode of Josh's Tesla. That's the onboard camera and sensor system that logs activity even when the car is parked. According to the car data, sometime in the early morning hours, the car leaves his apartment and drives to Huntsville International Airport, about 12 minutes away. The Tesla is parked at the airport and sits there for roughly 4 hours in an airport parking lot before dawn. Then eventually the car leaves the airport. It heads west along rural Alabama backroads. At some point along that route, the Tesla hits a guardrail, and then a bunch of trees, and then the car bursts into flames. Josh's body is inside. He is identified afterward through forensic means, probably dental records. Local authorities classify the incident as a single vehicle accident. They don't say anything about any possible foul play. Now, just a side note here, Congressman Eric Burleson, who's been one of the loudest voices on this case in Washington, has publicly claimed that the Tesla drove itself for 2 hours after leaving the airport. But I haven't seen any evidence anywhere that confirms this. The Sentry mode data establishes the airport stop, but no one has said anything so far about any autonomous driving. And there's no indication that anyone contacted Tesla to find out. So I'm setting Burleson's specific framing of that aside for now and just giving you what is on the record, which is that the car was at the airport for 4 hours and the crash happened on rural roads heading west. 3 days after Josh's death, his hometown news station out of Lafayette, Louisiana, KLFY, runs a story. In that story, his family says directly that they do not believe it was an accident. They point to the phone, the wallet, and the dog. They point to the airport stop. They point to the fact that none of this was anything Josh would ever do. That story runs in July of 2025, but the national and mainstream press don't pick it up. It just sits there. Local Louisiana coverage of a local Louisiana boy who died in Alabama working for NASA. And then in April of 2026, almost 9 months later, social media picks it up. Once social media has it, Fox News has it, News Nation has it, the New York Post has it. And right around then, the FBI adds Josh LeBlanc to the list of cases under their multi-agency review. Before we go further, I want to be honest about what has and has not been confirmed in Josh's case. No official cause of death beyond the fire has been released. There's no public toxicology. There's no public confirmation of foul play from any law enforcement agency. The FBI has explicitly stated that at this time, they've not established links between the cases under review. They are looking into them. They're coordinating across agencies, but they have not connected the dots publicly. So officially, all we have right now is a list of people. We have professional connections between some of them. We have institutional connections between several of them. And we have a member of Congress, Tim Burchett, sitting on the Oversight Committee telling reporters that he's been briefed by, in his words, just about every alphabet agency there is, and that the only common thread is that the dead and the missing all worked on things involving outer space, nuclear secrets, or missiles. So, let's talk about those connections. The first one is easy: geography. Josh LeBlanc lived and worked in Huntsville, Alabama. Huntsville is, in the words of Amy Eskridge,
Huntsville is the Silicon Valley of government national security technology and intelligence community technology and aerospace technology.
It is one of NASA's most important hubs, and it is the home of the Marshall Space Flight Center, where Josh was a team lead. If the name Amy Eskridge sounds familiar to you, it should. We talked about her last time. She's the 34-year-old researcher who died on June 11th, 2022, 3 years before Josh, from what was officially ruled a self-deletion due to the unfortunate confluence of her head and a bullet. She also lived in Huntsville. She also worked professionally and through her family in the Huntsville aerospace research community. Amy's father is Richard Eskridge, a retired NASA engineer. He specialized in plasma physics and fusion technology. His institutional home, the lab he came up through, was Marshall Space Flight Center, the same institution where Josh LeBlanc was team lead on a nuclear thermal propulsion program. Now, there's no evidence that Amy Eskridge and Josh LeBlanc ever met. They probably never did. But what does exist is institutional proximity. Her father came up through the lab where Josh eventually worked. The two of them were tied to the same research ecosystem, and that ecosystem is not that big. Now, I want you to remember something Amy said before she died. She said it on camera, on a podcast in 2020. She was explaining why she had founded the Institute for Exotic Science as a public-facing organization. She said,
"If you stick your neck out in public, at least someone notices if your head gets chopped off. If you stick your neck out in private, they will bury you. They will burn down your house while you're sleeping in your bed, and it won't even make the news." That's why the Institute exists.
Amy created a public profile specifically as a form of protection. She gave talks, she did podcasts, she presented at the HAL 5 High Frontier Symposium back in December of 2018. And on May 13th, 2022, about 4 weeks before her death, she sent a time-stamped written message to a friend named Frank Milburn, a former British intelligence officer. The message said, "If you see any report that I offed myself, I most definitely did not. If you see any report that I overdosed, I most definitely did not." She died on June 11th, 2022. The Institute for Exotic Science shut down. Its website went dark. Her father, the retired NASA engineer, has not spoken publicly since. And no autopsy, no police report, no coroner statement has ever been released for her death. Amy built a public face because she believed visibility was protection. Josh LeBlanc did not have a public face. He did not give talks, he did not do podcasts, he did not have an institute. He was a team lead at a federal research facility working on a classified adjacent nuclear propulsion program. Quietly, privately, heads down. In Amy's own framing from 2020, Josh was exactly the kind of researcher she warned would be buried without notice. Now, I want to walk you through the institutional connection, because this is the one that makes the back of my neck cold. Last time, we spent some time on a man named William Neal McCaslin. Bill McCaslin was a retired United States Air Force Major General, 2 stars, PhD in astronautical engineering from MIT. The man's resume reads like a how-to manual for staying classified your whole career. Director of Special Programs in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, which means if the project was black, he knew about it. And he was the commander of the Air Force Research Laboratory at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. After he retired, he ran a consulting firm advising the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy. He sat on the board of Riverside Research, a nonprofit that holds something in the neighborhood of $450 million in active defense and intelligence contracts. You know, just a regular guy. McCaslin disappeared on February 27, 2026, from his home in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He just walked off, possibly into the Sandia Mountains, which are basically his backyard, while his wife was at a doctor's appointment. He left behind his cell phone, his prescription glasses, and his wearable devices, which could be like an Apple Watch. He took his wallet, his hiking boots, a .38 caliber revolver, and a backpack. Investigators canvassed more than 700 houses in his neighborhood for security footage and could not find a single camera that caught him leaving the neighborhood. He still has not been found. Okay, so how does McCaslin connect to Josh LeBlanc? Well, Draco was a joint NASA and DARPA program. DARPA does not run its own research laboratories. It works through partner institutions. And the primary research partner for DARPA on aerospace and propulsion programs is the Air Force Research Laboratory. The Air Force Research Laboratory is the place McCaslin used to command. McCaslin's portfolio at AFRL, while he was in command, was around $7 billion. Advanced materials, directed energy weapons, space systems, and classified programs, per documented reporting, most members of Congress have never even heard of. After he retired from the Air Force, he founded a consulting firm, and that firm advised the Department of Defense and the Department of Energy, which are the 2 agencies that funded Draco. So follow the chain. Josh LeBlanc was team lead on Draco. Draco was funded by DARPA, which works through AFRL, which McCaslin used to command. After retirement, McCaslin was still advising both of Draco's funding agencies through his consulting firm. He sat on the board of a $450 million defense research nonprofit operating in the same ecosystem. Josh LeBlanc did not need to know Bill McCaslin personally for their 2 cases to be sitting in the same institutional web. And there's one more name from last time that I want to bring back here. Monica Reza. Monica was the materials scientist who co-invented Mondaloy, the nickel-based superalloy that the United States is using to build a domestic replacement for the Russian RD-180 rocket engine. The Mon in Mondaloy stands for Monica. The Air Force and NASA funded the research for Mondaloy. And the man who oversaw that funding at the AFRL was Bill McCaslin. Monica disappeared on June 22, 2025, while hiking Mount Waterman in the Angeles National Forest, 30 feet behind her hiking buddy, in an area she had hiked 1,000,000 times before. Search dogs could not pick up a trail from her beanie found 600 feet away in a ravine. She also has not been found. Monica disappeared June 22nd, 2025. Josh died exactly 1 month later on July 22nd, 2025. So you have a materials scientist who co-invented the alloy that powers next generation American rocket engines. And you have an engineer who led the program building the next generation American rocket engine. They both go down inside a 30-day window. The man whose funding portfolio covered both of their research areas walks into the mountains and vanishes 8 months later. That chain is institutional. It runs through the American military, space, and propulsion technology, and every link in it is on the public record. Now, hang with me on this for a minute while I dip my toe into the speculation pool. McCaslin's portfolio at AFRL, in public reporting, included directed energy weapons. That is part of what the Air Force Research Laboratory does. They develop lasers, microwave systems, and other energy-based weapons platforms. That's on the record. Amy Eskridge, before she died, told her friend Frank Milburn that she believed she was being targeted by a directed energy weapon. She said it was leaving burn marks and lesions on her hands. Congressman Burleson has since stated in public that there is, in his words, significant evidence she was targeted by microwave energy. Now, go back to Josh, specifically Josh's Tesla. Those who have looked into the actual data already know what I'm about to say. For everyone else, this might be a shocker. A Tesla vehicle, depending on how you measure it, is somewhere between 20 and 60 times less likely to catch fire than the average car in America. The Swedish government's emergency agency puts EVs at 20 times less likely. An Australian defense analysis puts the gap closer to 80 times. The US averages one fire for every 18 to 19 million miles driven. Compare that to Tesla's own fleet data, which shows one fire for every 135 million miles driven. The NFPA, the same agency that sets fire codes for every building you walk into, says there is no evidence EVs are more fire-prone than gas cars, and that in the United States, a gas car catches fire somewhere every 2 to 3 minutes. If everything you thought you knew about Tesla fires just took a hit, that is not your fault. That's what every algorithm on every platform has fed you for the last 5 years, because a Tesla on fire is content, and a Camry on fire is not. But the data is the data. Josh was driving a Tesla Model 3. Of every vehicle on the American road, it sits at the very bottom of the fire risk chart. Now, that being said, when EVs do catch fire, they burn extremely hot. Certain older lithium-ion battery packs are notorious for it. They don't catch fire very often, but when they do, it's game over. So, I am not telling you that the fire that consumed Josh's car had to come from an outside source. However, would it interest you to know that NASA has a patent on using an infrared laser to trigger thermal runaway in lithium-ion cells without physically puncturing the battery? High-power microwaves could also fry the electronics and potentially disrupt a Tesla battery's management system, leading to shorts or overheating. So, the car fire is consistent with what happens when a Tesla does catch fire. And it's also consistent with a fire that was meant to destroy evidence of what happened before the crash. And General McCaslin's research portfolio at AFRL covered the kind of energy weapon Amy claimed was used against her, as well as one that has the ability to start a Tesla on fire without touching it. I'm not saying that these things are connected. I'm saying it would be irresponsible not to at least point out the dots that might or might not be connected. Anyway, last time I told you about the GEC-Marconi cluster. 20-plus British defense scientists between 1982 and 1990 dying under what the Union leader called statistically incredible circumstances. Some worked on the SDI program, Reagan's Star Wars Missile Defense Initiative. And some worked on advanced underwater weapons. Some of them had complained before their deaths about being assigned what they called impossible or unscientific tasks. Some of them were planning to quit. Some of them had scheduled meetings with members of parliament. The Thatcher government said it was all coincidence. Members of parliament demanded an inquiry, but no formal investigation was ever opened. And the story was eventually forgotten. The only reason I'm circling back to these guys again is because there's one of those British scientists I want you to hear about specifically. His name was David Sands. He was a senior researcher at Marconi Defense Systems. In 1987, Sands made a sudden high-speed U-turn into an empty restaurant in a car packed with gasoline cans. The resulting fireball was so intense he had to be identified by dental records. David Sands, 1987, a scientist, a car, a fire so hot he was identified by his teeth. Josh LeBlanc, 2025, a scientist, a car, a fire so hot he was identified forensically. Different country, different decade, different programs, but the same kind of person doing the same kind of work, ending up the same kind of dead. Maybe that's a coincidence. People die in car fires every day. It happens. But 40 years and an ocean apart, the similarity is what it is, and pretending it isn't there doesn't make it go away. Now here is what I would give a lot to know about Josh's case. What was he doing at the Huntsville International Airport for 4 hours? Was he meeting someone, picking somebody up, dropping somebody off, waiting for someone who never showed? Was he even in the car for those 4 hours? Was the car parked there by somebody else? What route did the Tesla actually take after it left the airport? Who was at the wheel? Where's the official cause of death? Where's the toxicology? Was the phone wiped or factory reset? Where's the rest of the Tesla data? And was Josh, 53 days after the cancellation of his program, in some kind of unusual debriefing status that might explain why his name was, at some level, on somebody's mind? Programs involving nuclear materials don't just shut down. They get wound up. People with the right clearances sit through exit interviews. Records get sequestered. There's a process. And whatever Josh was carrying in his head when Draco was canceled was still either in his head or was being transferred somewhere else on the day he died. We don't have the answers to any of that. The FBI is reviewing the case. The White House has been briefed. The president called it pretty serious stuff. The families of those dead and missing scientists are waiting for someone to do something. And here's the part that really bothers me. I happen to be married to a Tesla-phile, so I probably know a little bit more about them than your average bear. So I know that Tesla collects the data of every single thing that happens in every car. If the FBI really wanted a giant head start in figuring out what happened to Josh, all they have to do is subpoena the records from Tesla. That would most likely tell us if he was in the car the 4 hours it was parked at the airport, what roads it drove afterward, and at what speeds. What happened to the electronics in the car that led to the fire? And most importantly, did the crash cause the fire, or did the fire cause the crash? So, that's where we are. 12 cases, one pattern, 3 different states, 4 years of activity, and a quiet institutional chain that ties 3 of the most striking victims together through a single retired Air Force general. Last time, I told you that if connections are eventually found in these cases, the most likely root cause is terrestrial. Some foreign actor wanting to slow down American development of advanced military technology. I still believe that's the most likely answer. Josh's death, in a weird way, makes that answer more likely, not less, because the chain we just walked through, Draco, DARPA, AFRL, McCaslin, Reza, Mondeloy, LeBlanc, that whole chain is about American military space and propulsion capability. That is exactly the kind of capability a foreign adversary would want to slow down. But I will also tell you this. The longer I sit with these cases, the harder it gets to watch the FBI say they haven't established any links yet. Because anybody with a notepad and an internet connection can lay out the institutional links between these people in a hot minute. The links are right there. The real question is who in any official capacity is willing to acknowledge them out loud. So, I'll be watching this. I'll be watching whether the FBI's review produces any public findings, whether any of the missing are found, whether any of the dead have their cases reopened, or whether these cases just slide off the news cycle as news stories come along. And if there is a 13th name, I will be back here with you to talk about it. And for the record, I am planning on living a long, long life. In the meantime, my heart is with the LeBlanc family, with Josh's parents in New Iberia, with his sister, with his friends, with the people who knew the rising NASA engineer who left his phone, his wallet, and his dog at home one morning in July and never came back to claim any of them. In my humble opinion, this is the craziest of all the stories in the cluster so far. Probably because I know the wealth of information that's available to any investigator who would bother to go get the data from the car. That would answer so many questions. What are they waiting for? But I will try to slow my roll and just wait to see how this whole thing continues to unfold. And if you missed the first part of this story and want to see how we got to 12, go ahead and click right here. Be careful out there, and I will see you here again on the In-Between.